The effect of the coronavirus pandemic has been felt in so many different sectors, and we've heard from many charities, both local and national, over the past 3 months about something, unfortunately, that they had spotted, and that is an increase in domestic abuse cases. Now, the government has announced reforms of the family court to make the system fairer for survivors and their children. But what exactly does it mean? What are these differences? What does it mean to those families? Let's speak to Janet Ford, who's a senior solicitor from Cygnet Law, who's actually pushed for these reforms for many years. Janet, thanks for joining me this evening. You all right?
Yes, I'm fine, thank you.
Good. Well, you've been pushing for these reforms for years. So can you give us an idea of what these reforms are? How are they taking shape?
Well, the bill that's currently before Parliament and that's been partially approved today is really to look at a more integrated domestic abuse system, really. And there's proposals of conjoining the family approach with the criminal approach to lessen the burden upon victims when they're giving evidence, so there's not a repetition of situations of having to give evidence twice, that type of thing. The bill's only sort of in its early stages, but it is progressing through Parliament reasonably rapidly. And there's we've now got a domestic abuse commissioner for England, which is Nicole Jacobs, and a victims commissioner who's Dame Vera Baird, and they have been pushing for this for a considerable period of time. As you're probably aware, the issue of domestic violence has been even more highlighted with the COVID lockdowns and the concerns around that. And I think it's important that victims are supported when they come forward with the reports of abuse, because it takes them quite a considerable amount of time and strength to be able to reach out. We do a lot of work with Eva, Women's Aid in Redcar, and we have considerable experience in this area. And it's something that we've been pushing for quite a long time. We actually work with Cleveland Police as well in respect of domestic violence protection orders. We assist them in obtaining those. And we know ourselves that there's two effective systems at the moment. There's the criminal route and then there's the family law route. And also the bill is trying to assist the court system insofar as giving further powers to judges to be able to deal with the cases in a less adversarial approach and a more investigative approach,
right?
To sort of assist really victims when they're giving evidence, because at the moment you can find a situation in some cases where if the perpetrator does not have a solicitor, that they can be put in a situation where they can cross-examine a victim. In a number of children cases, you have sometimes fact-finding hearings where there's been allegations of domestic abuse, and they've got to be resolved before the situation can progress for the children, which holds matters back. And so the system's being addressed altogether to look at a better way forward for victims, but also for children in these type of cases.
Yeah, well, one of the things I picked up on that particularly struck me in this is you were talking about the bravery to reach out in the first place. And I know in speaking to some of the survivors who have spoken out and reached out, it was one of the traumatic things that they felt was having to constantly repeat the story over and over again. It was almost like having to relive it time and again. So could this address it if the sort of the family and criminal approach was combined like that?
Yeah, I think that's why there's this idea of this integrated domestic abuse pilot to see whether that can be worked out. Because, that is one of the fundamental issues. Because obviously, if they come to a family solicitor first to obtain an injunction, and similarly there's a criminal proceedings. They're dealt with separately. So effectively, they're giving one statement to the police and then another statement to ourselves. Sometimes the family system can be held up waiting for information from the criminal side of things. And there is this repetition all the way through it. Also, sometimes, even within the family justice process, there's the different applications in respect of children and the Family Law Act for the injunctions. Although the court does try to consolidate some of the proceedings if necessary and if appropriate to that particular set of circumstances to avoid this type of situation. But the law in itself has been built up over a period of years, and I think it's time that it was looked at properly as a whole, as instead of all these sort of ad hoc measures that are being put in place to sort of resolve issues, because we know there's been a problem with it for a considerable period of time, as you've touched on yourself. And I think those higher up in the system than ourselves are aware of that, and that's why they've been looking at it. But it's resources with a lot of these things, as you'll be aware of as well, and the funding that's being cut in this area in respect of the support groups. Eva itself had some of its funding cut last year.
Yeah, we've spoken to them many times. They're always having to appeal to get it extended and everything. So. Listen, Janet, we're out of time, I'm afraid, but thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Will you keep us up to date? Because I'd like to follow this along to see how it goes through and see what kind of stage we're at. Is that all right?
That's absolutely fine, because it's a vast area and it's difficult to cover it in such a short period of time. But thank you for the opportunity for us to be able to do so.
Janet Ford, thank you very much. Senior solicitor from Cygnet Law.